Glenn, thanks a lot for coming on. So what exactly did the Post write that was untrue?
Essentially the entire article from start to finish. They had this big blockbuster announcement on Friday, which was obviously sensationalistic and would have a huge impact if it were true, that Russia and Vladimir Putin had actually invaded the U.S. electric grid by placing malware within the utility system in Vermont. They induced the governor of Vermont and a senator, Pat Leahy, to make these really bombastic statements about how this thug Vladimir Putin was trying to steal the heat to make Vermonters suffer during the winter. It turned out that the malware that was found was actually on a single laptop, totally unconnected to the grid. Then it turned out that the Russians actually had nothing to do with this malware, and then it turned out that what was on the laptop probably wasn't malware at all. So the story just collapsed one step after the next in the grandest humiliation possible.
Boy, that's really embarrassing. I bet they must have ran a front-page correction, and the editor, Marty Barron, must have gone on TV to apologize. Is that what happened?
Well, the amazing thing is, if this were just a one-time case, you know, you could say, well, sometimes media outlets make mistakes.
They do.
But this is the second huge debacle that they've had in the last 6 weeks. Just 6 weeks ago, they ran this huge story that Russia, through this fake news operation, had exposed 200 million people to Russian propaganda. A huge story that went everywhere. As it turned out, it was based on a list compiled by a secret group, a new group, that was accomplished only by putting huge sites, mainstream sites like the Drudge Report, and various Clinton-critical sites on the left, labeling them Russian propaganda outlets. The story collapsed after 2 weeks. There's a huge editor's note at the top of the story. Marty Barron, the head of the paper, when the story came out, announced it, unveiled it on Twitter, made a huge deal out of it. When the story collapsed and they had to discount their own source, he said nothing, the paper said nothing, so the story went everywhere. The retraction was heard by a tiny fraction of the people, and we've seen this over and over throughout the last year when it comes to Russia reporting.
Interesting. And you've also seen anybody who raises questions about it denounced as a tool of the Kremlin. Now, just to be clear for our viewers who don't know your background or mine, we have very different politics and have for our adult lives. But I'm interested in talking to you because I think you're totally honest, and I don't think you have any other motives. You're not taking money from the government of Vladimir Putin, correct?
Notwithstanding the fact that I've been accused by that of people like Howard Dean, the former head of the DNC, that is absolutely correct. I am not. And in fact, you know, you just heard the report that came out today was just another set of repackaged conclusions from the Intelligence Committee, which may or may not be true, that, again, were completely unaccompanied by evidence. And when you simply point that out, that the intelligence community keeps just repeating itself over and over, its assertions, without providing evidence that can be evaluated whether or not it's true, that subjects you to claims that you must love Vladimir Putin, that you're probably working for the Kremlin, when in fact it's just the basic kind of skepticism that all journalists should be exercising.
So is that what animates you? And you're not entirely alone. There are a couple other people on the traditional left who said, whoa, hold on a second. This is not straight reporting, and we ought to ask real questions before we accept the conclusions the government hands us. But tell me, are you interested in this story because you just think someone's not telling the truth, and as a journalist you need to find out why?
I mean, I think, you know, a lot of us came of age. You know, I started being a journalist and writing about politics in 2004, 2005, in the aftermath of the debacle of the Iraq War, where, you know, people were discredited, like Judy Miller in the front page of the New York Times, because they were just believing whatever the government was telling them without verifying it or asking for evidence, and that led to this disastrous war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And I thought the lesson from that, and there's lots of examples like that, that's just the most memorable one. I thought the example we were all supposed to learn from that was that we shouldn't accept government claims unless we see evidence it's true, particularly when the consequences are so grave. You have John McCain saying Russia has engaged in an act of war. Nancy Pelosi is accusing journalists of being accomplices of Russia who reported on this story, which is basically every media outlet in the country, including yours and mine. These are really serious charges. We should see evidence for that.
Exactly. That's my perspective precisely.